My name is Rashad Beal. I work at Peace Over Violence at the Metro location downtown. We are a domestic violence and sexual assault prevention agency. We have a couple of different divisions: intervention, emergency services, advocacy, which is our legal department, and then we have our prevention department, which is where I work out of. And I'm usually at schools within the Los Angeles Unified School District, teaching middle school and high school boys specifically, but also co-ed groups about some of these issues that we're dealing with, whether it's healthy relationships, toxic masculinity, bullying, sexual harassment, consent. You know, we want to get boys especially to start to normalize some of these things so that when they move on into the world, they are already prepared for, you know, how to interact with other people.
Thank you.
When did I identify as a feminist? Okay, so I was a late bloomer. I began to kind of identify as a feminist in my late 20s, and I want to say that it was based on the more that I actually read. I started to pick up more books by women authors and read the literature by especially women of color, and start to view the world in a whole new worldview, right? Because I realized that a lot of our history, a lot of our education, it comes from the vantage point of the male gaze and men. And all of our heroes are usually men in the history books, and so we only have that kind of lens to view the world. And so when I started reading about more women's contributions, it was just kind of like that eye-opening moment, like, you know, gender is, especially for me, is sort of like race. So it's like when I first realized what racism was and how it could hurt me, it was that same kind of awakening where, you know, now I'm realizing, oh, there's an entirely different demographic that I've been interacting with my entire life, but I've never really empathized with what it means to be a woman, and knowing that I can't sympathize with it. Like, I mean, I can't put understand what women go through, but I can also try to empathize and understand based on the way that I understand discrimination. So just looking at that is how I started to identify. And then even though it sounds a little trite, you know, I had a daughter, and once I had a daughter, it was like I really have to start like looking at the world that we live in and looking at how I've contributed to the patriarchy and sexism. And then, you know, I started looking at how I treated my own wife and where I was lacking in communication. And then, of course, I moved out to how am I treating all women, regardless of if they have any kind of relationship with me or whether they're just a woman walking around the world. So.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Oliver Richardson. I work at Black Women for Wellness, which is a nonprofit organization that helps Black women and Black girls. Underneath that, I work at Get Smart Before You Get Sexy, which is a reproductive sexual youth program for youth students, and we pretty much teach them about sexual health, and we talk to them about ways that they can protect themselves from diseases and things of that sort. I have recently said that I am a feminist this upcoming year. With my job now, working there has made me become a feminist because working with young women, you know, they go through a lot being in high school and having to deal with other men and men that are not, I want to say, they're not open-minded to what girls go through. So at the end of the day, you know, I just try to get other men and men that are my age to understand what girls go through, and that you can't just look at them a certain way, you know, and judge them, and that you have to understand what they go through.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephen Simon. I'm the director of the Department on Disability for the City of Los Angeles. Our mission is kind of really short and sweet. Our job is to ensure that every single city program, service, facility is accessible, period. And so we focus a lot, we like to take it a step further, right? Let's look at gender, let's look at sexual orientation, let's look at race, let's look at economic status and see how that impacts access. So I'm very proud of where we're going in the city of LA, and love to always partner with the city of West Hollywood and your Disability Commission and move forward. So that's what I do. Well, becoming a feminist. So when I was 6, I'll make this quick. When I was 6, I had a younger brother 3 and older brother 9. My mother, who had mostly been a stay-at-home mom and some part-time jobs here and there, decided, I want to do something a little different. Maybe I'll get a job. Maybe I'll become a surgeon. So I got to watch her go through medical school. And her graduation for me when I was a young teen was one of those extraordinary moments. That was not when I became a feminist. It didn't occur to me that women sort of weren't supposed to do that back then, or that there was odd or anything about that. I just didn't get it. I didn't get that it was odd maybe that Dad came home and cooked dinner some nights and Mom did some nights, we did ourselves some nights. It's just how it worked. So it wasn't until I was probably young 20s when I really ran into, wow, people find this strange. People find my worldview of equality an odd thing. And I became a race sort of focused activist at the time, then became an AIDS activist, and throughout both, I think I was a feminist.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mohajer. I am the co-founder of Bros for America, which actually started as Bros for Hillary. Thank you. We campaigned for the first female major party nominee for President of the United States, and we surely expected to win that campaign. And we were so sort of involved by the end of the campaign season. We had like 45,000 members across our different platforms, and we were working with her actual digital campaign, doing messaging, and I mean, it was like a whole second full-time job. And then we were invited to New York to go to her election night party, and that's where I left my heart. And so literally the next morning, I was flying back to LA with my colleagues from Bros for Hillary, and we were like, what are we gonna do? And Bros for America was sort of the next iteration, and basically what our message is, our bros are all of us, men, women, gay, straight, black, white. It's a message of inclusivity and progressivism, and kind of like a response to the white nationalist Bernie bro bullshit that you heard during that last election. So, when did I become a feminist? I don't know that I ever became a feminist. I grew up with a single mom. She's sitting right there taking video. And I think I probably became privy to the fact that women have to wear every single freaking hat possible. I mean, like, it's inhuman. Like, how can anyone? I look at the responsibility that women shoulder, and I go, like, I can't do it. There's a huge double standard, and so I think just from a young age, that's where it started. And then UC Berkeley, great school.
Hi everyone, I'm John Erickson. Chelsea, I'm so glad that you're moderating this panel. I am the president of the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women. I'm the very proud president of that chapter. Go see our table in the back, raise your hands, Raina and Amanda. Woo! Sorry, got in the plug. I'm also Governor Brown's appointee to the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. I'm the first man on that. I have a lot of hats that I seem to wear. I don't look good in hats though, so that's always fun. But I think I first became a feminist. I grew up with badass women in my life. And I always just say I was raised right? I grew up with two fierce sisters who dictated their lives on their own terms, when they wanted to get married, when they wanted to have children, when they got their dual master's degrees, when they won amazing athletic competitions, when they became All-Americans in volleyball. I mean, everything I looked up to, I had them. I had a mother who was just so supportive, and then I had a grandmother who just set, I think, the trajectory for me. And she was my best friend, and so, she picked me up from school every single day, and I spent like hours with her. It's weird when you have an 18-year-old saying you're gonna go hang out with your grandmother, right? But I did. Her name's Gladys, and she was the first female staff sergeant in the U.S. Army when the group of women, when WACs really started going in and being part of service. She was the first president of the Wisconsin chapter of the Veterans of Foreign war, and so she really existed in these very hyper-masculine, militaristic spaces, and she just became this icon to me, and it just kind of was like that subversive narrative that really just worked its way into me, and I always just say I was born a feminist, right? I don't know, when you have people leading the way, raising babies, raising your families with those principles, change the world.
Awesome. Yeah, can you give it up for panelists? So we're going to do some questions for the individual panelists based on the work, based on their role as activists in their communities. And we're going to start with Rashad. And while you start speaking, please also, I hope everybody's on Twitter tweeting about this. There's going to be some good content, so please make sure you share a Twitter handle, Instagram handle if that's appropriate. Rashad, I read an article that you wrote for Peace Over Violence that was profoundly amazing and will be shared multiple times on Twitter. You wrote in that, if we truly want to be seen as good men, then we must accept that we created patriarchy and step to the forefront to destroy it. Only then can we say, not all men. Could everyone hear that, like, really clearly? I think that's some profound, amazing language. And then you go on to share some really helpful questions and advice. And while there aren't many men in the room, I think this is being live streamed, and I hope that the women in this room are able to take back some advice or some words. But you shared some questions to start that digging, that unlearning process for men to step into, which is a process and a journey. So I thought maybe you could share some of those questions or what that process sounds and looks like, and maybe tailor it to the women in this room and how you'd encourage them to support them.
Okay, well, I think one of the first questions that men have to ask ourselves is, who was my first teacher? You know, like, who was the first man that, or, you know, in some cases, who was the first woman who taught me that men had this certain role in life, or, and women had another role. So it's like, when I'm talking to the youth, I'm asking them to, let's go in and let's explain the gender roles. And let's talk about the gender roles that we accept and the ones that we see in our house, in our homes, and just ask ourselves, who taught us that this was the way it was supposed to be? Who taught us that men were being designated like the king of the household, was supposed to go out and work and make his wife stay at home? Who taught us that the woman was supposed to cook all the meals, or wash the clothes, or take care of the babies? Who told us that men had these positions of power and that it was just the way it was supposed to be? A lot of times I'll hear that exact remark is like, well, this is just the way it is. Like, we know there are double standards, but this is just the way life goes. Well, who told you that? So I just try to get men to kind of understand the whys, asking about, why is this supposed to be true? Because we know that as we grow up, we know that a lot of things that we hear aren't necessarily true, or that our viewpoints can change over time, whether it be growing up and seeing race a different way, or growing up and seeing religion a different way. You find things that you've learned as a child, and maybe you grow up and start to ask those questions. But I find a lot of times we don't really ask those questions when it comes to gender. We just kind of accept it the way it is. And it's trauma. And so being in a trauma-informed agency, I think that we have to view every person through that lens, even men. Men grow up in this system called patriarchy, and they're trapped with this disease that I call it, of toxic masculinity, and we don't have a vaccine for it yet. We're like really looking to find out what is it that causes young boys to grow up with this idea of how the world should be. So that's the first thing, is like, ask yourself, who is my teacher? And then ask yourself, why do I believe this? And once you start asking those questions, then some of that internal reflection can start to happen, which I think is something that all men have to do, is do that internal, like, challenging yourself all the time, every day, doing the work, the hard work of, telling yourself when you're messing up, and telling yourself and catching yourself when you're maybe supporting ideas of toxic masculinity, or supporting ideas of how we label women, or looking at a woman and saying, oh, well, she's wearing that, so I think, no, you got to stop it right there and say, why do I believe this is how I should be approaching this situation?
Awesome, thank you. And I think that's a great way. I was going to keep it going down the row, but I'm going to kick it over to Alex because Alex has a lot of great experience dealing with the media. And when you talk about who's a teacher, who's reinforcing these ideas in your head, I think the media can so often get positioned in that role of being an informer. And Alex, you, oh my gosh, waded through the 2016 presidential election. So perhaps you are an expert in misogyny, right? The role of...
What do you mean?
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like you faced a double standard?
If you want to incur some hatred or some wrath, cover Hillary Clinton positively. I mean, it is. I am abused endlessly online. I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy. And Hillary Clinton is still being bashed in the media 2 years freaking later, and that is for a reason, because of endemic misogyny. That is it. There is no reason that when John McCain loses, he goes back to the Senate, a respected senator. Mitt Romney, he has a career in politics ahead of him. They're talking about making him Secretary of State. He's going to run for president again. When Al Gore loses, he becomes an Oscar winner, a playboy in Hollywood. You know, Hillary Clinton loses, and please shut up and go to the woods. Really. Like, people say, shut up, sit down, be quiet, go to the woods. This is in the media. This is like, I don't know if you guys caught that I'm a commentator for HuffPost and others, so that's just the way it's covered. That it's allowed to be covered that way is a huge problem. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. She won more votes than any other presidential candidate in American history, second only to Barack Obama. She deserves to have her say. She deserves to have her say. So I think the way that it has been covered post-election is sort of indicative of how it was covered during the election. And if a woman is facing that kind of obstacle in seeking highly elected office, that's a problem. Donald Trump had, by November of 2016, had $5 billion worth of free media coverage during the election. Hillary Clinton was dragged through the mud for spending $1 billion on her campaigns, like she had to, because she was up against a $5 billion juggernaut. So I think that the media systems and the way we have these conversations are very heavily slanted still, and it kind of is incumbent on us to demand very loudly that they change the way they frame the conversation.
And so often we talk about trusted messengers, right? And I think you all have probably played that role of being a trusted messenger in a community of men, where you can espouse values that may not be readily understood or acted upon in a community of men, and still, because you're a man talking about those things, you're more well received. So I was curious, I mean, all of you I'm sure could speak to it, but especially as a male ambassador for Hillary Clinton in the media, you said you faced attack. I mean, what, do you feel like you were received better or not even?
Oh, no, I mean, no, I'm attacked all the time.
Like right now, you're probably on Twitter trolling you.
I guarantee you, if you go on my Twitter right now, I'm being trolled. I guarantee you, if you right now, you will see. You're talking about toxic masculinity. Ben Shapiro wrote a hit piece on me personally. I'm like a no-name. Like, I'm not that big of a deal. I mean, I'm a little bit, but. Ben Shapiro is punching down at like the little guy, trying to like cut us off at the root because we're voicing our opinion about something that needs to change. And he attacks people who speak up about toxic masculinity on his podcast. He ridicules it. He implies that we're somehow lesser, like ridicules our masculinity for standing up for women's rights. And it's if you're not strong enough, because we do live in a very misogynistic society, to sort of be like, I don't give a, that whatever, then you're gonna be susceptible to that. You're gonna be vulnerable to that. So anyway. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Stephen, I want to ask you, and I don't mean to put the whole weight of talking or speaking to intersectionality on you, but you did so really well in your introduction. You spoke to the various intersections that in just your work in the Department of Disability Services you have to think about and interact with. So in terms of strengthening feminism, maybe you could speak to the way that the various intersections of feminism, and you specifically coming at it as a disability advocate, how does lifting up those intersections of our work strengthen the movement?
Boy, intersectionality, the big word, right?
Yes.
I guess I'd start by framing that by by pointing out how women with disabilities, particularly women of color with disabilities, are sort of the most marginalized group in the world, I would argue, right? Highest levels of unemployment, highest levels of poverty, highest levels of domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and so on. So finding that space of inclusion, you know, sort of modern feminism, if you will, has done a generally good job around race. We're getting there. Generally done a good job around sexual orientation. Disability still seems like that last frontier we don't get to. We run into conflicts. I mean, you know, in the last few, when I was AIDS coordinator a few years ago, we ran into space where people were very upset with me because we talked about having condoms. I can't even remember where it was, but it was for women with disabilities, because what would they do with condoms, right? When we're living in that kind of space where you can desexualize people because of their ability or disability, we've got a problem that has to be dealt with on a sort of massive scale, if you will. So I do think that's changing. I do think, I could go like 10 different ways with this with another question, and if you're going to ask that other one, I'm not going to say it later, because we talked about one earlier. We talked about potential bomb, you know, and I'm not going to leave out for now. What I would point out is, if you're with an organization that is serving women in particular, you know, you have a legal obligation to start there to make sure all of your programs are accessible. It's that simple. Title III of the ADA, you have to do it, okay? It's not an afterthought. Whether you're, you know, whether it's medical clinic space, any kind of public accommodation, we have to go there. So how do you do that? If you're a small business, I was having a conversation earlier with Annie, small businesses struggle to do that. You know, partner in the city of LA, we're working with Title III entities to help them get accessible so they're not getting sued. So they're getting women with disabilities as part of their day-to-day work. I guess my last piece of that is, there's the technical accessibility, certainly there's the legal accessibility, but the moral and the ethical piece is just plain pure inclusion. I don't know where to go. It's not a complicated situation. If you need the technical help, we'll help you get sign language interpreters, video interpreting, talk about what that ramp needs to look like. But outside of that is your outreach. When you any kind of public communication, when you're doing media work, are you reaching out and messaging to women with disabilities? It's just necessary. We need to start doing it yesterday.
I just want to give Stephen the biggest compliment too, because he, so I put on a little march with the team called the Women's March for a couple of years. How many of you went?
Little march.
Little march, right? And the night, and you know, Stephen gets requests all the time for this type of accessibility that he champions. And he was talking to us at midnight, the night before the march, to make sure we had enough interpreters at all of our stages, so that way people of all abilities could make sure they could take part in the same march that everyone that here, that, you know, we could take part in as well. And so I just want everyone to give him a round of applause, because he works through it.
Now, I do have to immediately point out, that was my work phone going off. Why is my work phone going off at this hour right now? So my apologies. I didn't turn it off because you called me on a Sunday in the middle of the panel. But we do get those
Somebody
calls.
needs your services right now.
There you go. It's off. My apologies.
Thank you. And John, since you were on the mic, which you probably will pick up at some point again, and you're a great convener of these feminist spaces. You mentioned your role in the Women's March, you played a role in the Resist March. In addition to the boards and commissions, your work here in the city of West Hollywood, you've been such a great convener for feminist issues. And I wanted to talk about the intention that has to go into creating a feminist space, a space of inclusion, and maybe some of the challenges that you've run up against and how you've navigated that.
Yeah. I think Stephen really talked about it and addressed the issues that anything that we do, from Hollywood Now, from the Commission, to the Women's March, to the Resist March, intersectionality is really the key. You want somebody that goes to an event or a march and can see themselves, or see a variation of themselves, and really take part in the community that really does bring to you as a viewer, an attendee, a patron, whatever it is. You want to see that in the media, you know, you want to see that in the work that we're doing with sexual justice and sexual violence, and, you know, and making sure that these spaces specifically are feminist inclusive, right? And I think feminism is a verb, right? Feminism is doing, you have to do the work, and doing the work takes that extra time to make sure that every part of an event feels inclusive. It's a lot of work, and that's why people don't do it. I mean, because it's hard work. People say, oh, I've covered my bases, right? Well, actually, have you covered those bases? I mean, I know we use this example all the time, but does everyone remember that like Senate panel where it was like all white men that's got like doing birth control for women, like years ago, healthcare? It's when, who's that racist that called Sandra Fluck, a slut? That was that guy that she was commenting on that, and that's when all that we started really having these conversations. We do not want that. With the work that Hollywood now does, when we did our production of the Vagina Monologues back in February, going through the casting, what is your story? That's what I like to do when you're hearing people. Well, tell me who you are. What's your story? Where do you come from? Because there's something that might not appear this way that appears in here. And that is the piece that we're really key of when I plan the programming for the Women's March. So I'm on the core team of like really 4 to 5 people that put that small march on. And who gets to speak is so hard. And who gets to be on stage is even more difficult. But we really had to make some really tough decisions. I'm proud of everything that march represented. I'm proud of the Resist March. I'm proud of Hollywood Now. I'm proud to be a different face on the California Commission because it represents that other picture of what could be. And that's what we need to strive for when we convene these spaces. I mean, I used to work for the city of West Hollywood for, I don't know, it feels like 13 to 16 years. It was really 6. But when you work for a city that is so brilliant, like the city of West Hollywood, that does programs just like this, that does something every month. And Women's History Month is, Amanda, the vice chair of the Women's Advisory, they do like 40 events in like 30 days. I mean, it's insane because that's not happening the rest of the year. So being able to put on that type of programming, myself and my colleague, we're really putting on the gender and women programming throughout the city. Every piece of programming that we did had to include that type of reflection. And it's a lot of work, and we need more people up here to continue that work in all aspects, and there's a lot more work to be done.
Mm-hmm. There is. Oliver, I want to talk, please, thank you. Speaking of more work to be done, the last 6 months have felt like a tidal wave of activism pouring out of high schools and young people. And from everything that's happened with March for Our Lives, the school shootings, all of that, and to not see that as feminist activism, to not see what these students and these young people are doing to fight for better inclusion in their schools and the decision-making process, because inclusion also includes the youth, right? People who are very much impacted by this. It's no longer up to the school boards or to the elected officials who represent school districts. It's actually up to the students what safety looks like. Oliver, I wanted to ask you, what does feminism feel like in the context of your high school setting? Do you see your peers engaging with feminism in a positive way? Or do you still think there's a ways to go before we fill that gap?
There's definitely ways to go. Youth now, I don't know what's going on with our youth, but they're not understanding feminism at all. So I feel like they need to be shown either more videos, or they need to talk to more men about what's going on, or something needs to change. I mean, because now men that are my age, they're still doing the same things, saying stuff to women they're not supposed to be saying, or looking at them certain ways, and I feel like now girls feel like they can't even walk down the street without someone our age looking at them a certain way, or oh, why do you have that on? You shouldn't be wearing that. Or if they're walking somewhere and a guy tries to touch them or something, So I feel like there is a lot that we need to talk to our youth about, because our youth need to know now that the things that they're doing, it's not okay. So I feel like that's one of the main things that we need to either sit down, have a conversation, or show more videos. We need to have more walks. We need to do something with our youth.
He's 17.
Yeah.
When I was 17, I was 19 years old. It's really impressive. You're a really impressive young man. Sorry.
No, please. I love that you're engaging with each other. I think that's great. I think that's a great place to start, right? Maybe we should have started with you. What is the temperature of youth when it comes to feminism? Because that's actually where we have to go. And your voice, as somebody who experiences this, who works in a very feminist space, and then goes to a high school where you don't feel like your peers reconcile that has to be very tough. And I'd like to continue to ask you, what would you ask of the leaders that you're on stage with now, or the audience in the crowd? How do you think that we could interface with youth in a more productive, positive way?
Honestly, I feel like we just need to get into the schools and talk to the principals that are there. So that way, when you talk to the principals, that means that now you can bring people on the campus to actually talk to the students, and like you can have, like how we're all having this panel here, we can do this with youth, and I feel like that would help them a lot, because if you have a panel, they'll be like, oh, I hear what he's saying, I understand where he's coming from, he's already been through this. And when a young man looks at an older man, then they understand like, oh, okay, maybe what I am doing is right. I don't have to act like this or be this type of way just to be, I want to say, like more manly or masculine, you know? So I feel like if we get more men out there to talk to the younger men, then they'll understand and their minds will change and they'll realize what they're doing is actually wrong and it's not okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, right. Like creating that intentionally inclusive space in the high school setting.
Yes.
I think that's incredible, and I heard you two whispering about doing a panel, so that's
Well,
taking it on the road.
We're going to take this show on the road. But I just want to say what Oliver was pointing out is that it really is a question of masculinity, right? I mean, it really does come down to how our culture is permeated down, and I heard this in Sahar's amazing workshop before. Shout out to Sahar. But, really talking about how men are raised today, right? I said I was raised right because I was raised by people that saw that difference. We need more people doing that. But when it comes to masculinity, not everyone's masculinity is the same thing, right? I mean, I identify as gay, but I'm an all-American athlete and a national champion, right, in men's volleyball. And the thing is that when we won the national championship, I had other LGBT athletes come to our hotel room where we were celebrating afterwards and just say thank you. It was so amazing to see a gay man on a court on that type of a stage, and it makes me feel okay. It makes me feel okay with being who I am, and it's so sad that we have to have people feel like they're less than or that they can't fully, express who they are because of these. This toxic masculinity that puts you in a box and just shoves you away. And then everything that comes with that is just, as we see throughout society today.
I think this also, it comes down to binaries. Like everything in our society is framed in binaries. Good versus evil, Democrat versus Republican, man versus woman, gay versus straight, where one is the superior and one is the inferior, and if everything is structured in that way, we are constantly going to view one as negative and one as positive, and constantly aim to sort of exalt one and put one at the subjugated level. So, what was that? I didn't hear you. So I think that's a problem, and that's why we hear so much negative feedback towards like the trans community in the conservative news media. Like there's a lot of hatred towards the trans community. I don't know if you guys watch those channels. You shouldn't. But they just like bash the trans because it doesn't fit into the box that they identify with, that they've used to sort of categorize things. And we gotta break free from those boxes. That's gotta be the primary objective.
How many of us have been hurt by a box we've been forced into? Right? That's an experience everybody can relate to. Yeah, screw the boxes. We're done with them. Rashad?
No more boxes. Put it on my...
Yeah, it's just I like what you guys are saying about the box, because the box is an activity that I really use in schools to kind of break this down. And I can either use the box or I use gumbo. And because I grew up in the South, my mom, my dad, they're both from Louisiana. Most holidays, somebody makes a big pot of gumbo. And the way I describe masculinity is like, especially to boys who are raised in this hyper-masculine culture, it's like everybody wants to be masculine. We see it in our movies, we see it in our superheroes, we see it on videos, we see it everywhere. You want to be this ideal image of a man, right? But I compare it to gumbo and saying like, masculine values can be good. We're not telling young boys like, you don't have to be masculine, or that feminism means that you're trying to take away their masculinity. It's not that. It's that it's like gumbo. You can have some of it in there, and it can make you a well-rounded individual. But too much of these so-called masculine values can actually make the pot unappealing. And so it's like if you have too much aggression, if you have too much like strength to where you're withholding your emotions, things like that. You know, a lot of boys feel like, oh, you know, I can't talk to my friends about issues because of this box. You know, when we're younger, it's okay to like put your arm around your homeboy and walk with him down the street, or spend a night over your guy friend's house and, you know, roughhouse and play and things like that with affection. You know, that's okay when you're a child. All of a sudden, when you get to like adolescence and puberty, some of these things start to become looked down on. So it's like you can't put your arm around your friend. You can't hug your friend unless you follow it up with like a no homo, which of course then goes, you know, to like the masculine hatred towards the LGBT community without even knowing it. You know, it's like I don't want to be anything that's close to the feminine side. So if I use these slurs like, you know, homo and other ones, you know, it's making me feel more masculine by tearing down what's feminine or what we view to be feminine. And so it's like, you know, we can't do these certain things, but it's like, again, you ask the question why. Why can't we do these things? Why is it deemed not masculine to hug your friend or to talk about your emotion? And then we wonder why when we're adult men, we have 3 times the rate of death by suicide than women. You know, like this is an issue because we're holding on to these emotions and we're so afraid to let anybody know what we're going through because we're scared that it's going to make us weak or soft, or, you know, we're going to be like a girl, you know, or some things like that, to where we are hurting ourselves. And toxic masculinity is harming us. You know, we're having high blood pressure. You know, we can't cope. We don't have any communication methods. And then, you know, we wonder why we're dying at such early ages, or, you know, releasing this violence into the world. And in my article, I mentioned, I compared it to like a volcano. You know, like volcanoes are majestic, volcanoes are beautiful, but at the same time, they're very dangerous. And, you know, they're holding all this pressure on the inside, and they have no way to release it. And then, you know, at some point, the volcano erupts. And with that eruption, the lava goes into the communities around the volcano, destroying everything. And that's kind of like what toxic masculinity does to us men, is that we're holding these emotions, we're holding these feelings, and then, you know, one day, here we are committing mass shootings, here we are committing domestic violence, sexual assault, all these acts of violence that, you know, nobody seems to want to pinpoint it and trace it back to the roots, which is this toxic masculinity. You know, if you look at mass shooters, damn near all of them, you know, have connections to domestic violence or sexual assault. All of them. Las Vegas shooter, even Omar Mateen at the shooter in Orlando, like they all have ties to domestic violence. So it's like, what is that connection? It's that we don't have outlets. And I'm not excusing the behavior because we can understand the trauma, but also hold ourselves accountable. But there is trauma there. And if we want to stop it, we have to go back to the roots and understand that this is how we're raising our boys. And as long as we're raising our boys like this, and as long as men are passing down these values and these behaviors as normal, then none of this is going to stop. It's going to just keep on happening.
I can just add on to that too, just as like a side note, is that misogyny isn't owned by men, just like, you know, feminism isn't owned by women. This is something that is, it's a problem for all of us, and it's something that we all need to take on and shoulder, regardless of our gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is, because it affects all of us. Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. It's, who said that? So I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's incumbent on all of us.
Thank you. Yeah, patriarchy is the system that disconnects us from our sense of self, right? And that goes for all people. So if we're torn away from our core sense of who we are, then we're just out in the chaos of the world without any kind of leash onto that core set of values. So I think feminism is the act of realigning ourselves with a core compass of values that help us navigate the world through a lens of inclusion instead of isolation, right? That making all the spaces amongst ourselves welcome to all people, accessible to all people, because that by nature allows you to be there and you're not alone. So if we're smashing down patriarchy, we're tearing apart the system that says that we are not allowed to be in a relation, that we are not allowed to be in kinship with one another, then we will be fostering healthy relationships. And I think that's a good point to bring to the last part of this panel, which is the sexual justice, right? Gender justice, ultimately cultivating better equality or equity between the genders, the whole spectrum of genders. But I just want to say, so Hollywood Now is live streaming this on Facebook.
Hey.
And
where's our camera?
Well, it's right over there. But I just shared it real quick so my family could see it. But we got a comment on the ways in which someone's saying, why are men speaking at a women's leadership conference? It's always the number one question I always get. Literally, somebody went to our membership officer, Sarah Ivy, and said, why is there a president why is the man a chapter president? I get it every day, and it's fine. And I always say, because when you only include 50% of people in the conversation, equality will never occur.
Yeah, thank you.
Right? But the comment was about this, right? Well, you're all here for a reason, because you want to learn more. We want people in the room together. We need men at the conversation. When men are committing domestic violence, when men are in charge, that's the problem. We see Donald Trump not in charge. We all know he's not in charge. But when we see somebody like that, we need to include everyone as part of the conversation, because you're not going to get there. We're going to keep having these conversations. It happens with men when men don't want to say that they're feminists or do that, and it happens with women when women then don't want men even in the room. And our question that got to our membership officer was like, well, show up at our next meeting then. It's like April, whatever, and do the work. Come do the work. John doesn't want to do the work because I'm tired and I do a lot of work. But like we're all tired, right? Because we've been running a lot lately, right? We're all on overdrive. But come to the next meeting. Get involved with our chapter. Take over. Become president. Become, whatever you want to be. Just show up and do the work. That is what is the most important part. Show up, do the work like these amazing gentlemen are, and change will occur.
Yeah.
John, do you remember the first Now meeting that I brought? What did I bring with me? A bunch of men.
Yes. Yes.
For those who didn't hear her, she said when she showed up to her first Now meeting, she brought a bunch of men with her, which is the exact right thing to do. And while this is an incredible space of women's leadership, we know that men being in this space, learning from our leadership, and being a part of our leadership styles will make the world a better place. So thank you for saying that. And I want to talk a little bit where it would be remiss of us to not talk about sexual violence. Everybody here has played a role in addressing it in some capacity. But as men, starting back at that very early age, how do we address the moment that we're in? We can't start over, but how do we start from here in a more holistic and compassionate and inclusive sense and move forward? I think, when I talk to some of the men in my life, there's a sense of perennial terror that they live in, like not knowing, we see the blogs and the comments and all these things about, well, how am I supposed to interact with a woman now? And we know that that's bogus. I'm sure you men have, navigated the water safely and perhaps encountered some challenges along the way. But what advice do you have for men living in this moment of Me Too? How can they, strip themselves of that fear or sense of paralysis of not knowing how to be a part of the conversation that we're in and be a part of it in a healthy and productive way for us all?
I think that we have to let men know that it's okay for us to be involved. And like John said, if we're going to be involved, then there's two things that we have to do. One is we have to do the work and shut up while we're doing the work, right? Like, we shouldn't be going around expecting thank yous for, doing what's right, things like that. Like, we all know that ego is good, right? Of course we all
thank yous.
like, of course we all enjoy when people are appreciative of what we do, but that's not why we should be doing this work. We should be doing this work because we want to see a safer community for everybody. We want to be able to have everybody walk around and feel safe and not be afraid of people that are living on this earth with them. And then the second thing we have to do is listen. We have to listen to the women that came before us. Listen to, as Stephen says, listen to the most marginalized. Work within the margins of the margins. That means, listening to women of color, listening to black women, because black women be knowing what's going on. So listen to them. Listen to differently abled people. Listen to everybody. Listen to the trans community, because they are affected most by what's happening. Anything that we're affected by, they're affected by double or triple. So listen. Indigenous women. We cannot leave out the indigenous women, because without them, we wouldn't even be here, right? Because they own this earth, they own this land that we're living on, and we always have to pay tribute to them, specifically. And so when I'm talking to men, the one thing that I always like to do is go back to consent. And because the consent part is, I think, the most important, and I take it back to permission. And a quick story about that is, like, me and my wife, we have 2 beautiful children. That's my wife right there. But we have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. Our 6-year-old girl, she likes Funyuns, loves Funyuns. Always food.
Who doesn't?
Are you saying Funyuns or fungus?
Love Funyuns.
Funyuns.
But she calls them yellow chips. And every time we're out, every time we're going somewhere, she's always asking for yellow chips. And so one day she was asking me for some, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll get you some. So I got her some chips, and as we're driving in the car, I reach back and I just take some chips, because I'm hungry too, so I just take some chips and I start eating them. And then she goes, Daddy, why you take my chips? And I'm just like, oh, well, I was hungry, baby, I just wanted some chips. She goes, but you didn't ask me first. So it's like this 6-year-old girl just owned me, right? Just told me and taught me how, things as simple as just asking for permission has been lost within our society. We learn all these things when we're young. She's in kindergarten, so these manners and these things are being taught to her. We learn them the same way in kindergarten, but then as we grow up, for whatever reason or another, we lose these manners and just the simple things and how we interact with people. And we forget to ask for permission. We forget to check to make sure that somebody is okay with how we're interacting with them. And then, of course, everything is lost in translation, and we end up doing things to harm women or harm our partners, where it's all because we didn't take the time to listen or just ask for permission. So it's like, if we want to talk about consent, yes, we can talk about the legal aspect, but let's just break it down and talk about permission and how we should all be asking for permission in our daily interactions and practicing it.
Thank you.
I'm going to free associate, but I'll try and keep it tight. There's a couple of quick points I want to make. One, the commonality, I think, of the folks on the stage here, apart from gender, is that we're all from institutions one way or another, or we deal with institutions. So I think people have a responsibility, but your question was around men. Men have a responsibility for addressing the misogyny they see in their institutions, right? So when my city puts out a training on domestic violence, on sexual harassment, and we're going through it and saying there are misogynist things in our training and anti-LGBT things in our city training on, we gotta fix that. So, we're up the next day and took that responsibility and then worked with personnel, and they immediately fixed it because someone said something, right? They might have wanted to do the right thing. I'm sure they wanted to do the right thing in the first place, but somebody sort of called them on it that made a difference. Point 2, though, is the individual level of work, and it came up in this conversation a little earlier. From your organization, for example, Peace Over Violence, I believe in the work you do as well. We're out there training young men in particular to go out and be advocates, right? Because they're just conversations on the street with their friends, and when they run into a situation where they say, this is a problem, that they immediately take action, they speak up and say something. That makes a huge difference. Another prop I want to give to Peace Over Violence, you asked me about, disability and inclusion. Peace Over Violence is the model organization for it, right? They include women with disabilities in basically everything they do. It's not an afterthought. Everything's accessible. The materials are accessible. There are targeted programs, but it's just inclusion. So I think at all these different levels, the institution and the individual is where we make the difference. And getting young folks, again, to just speak up, just call it out. And last thing, I swear. But coming back to this definition of masculinity, I think I agree with that point where I don't know the message is to tear down masculinity. It's to tear down historically misapplied masculinity, right? Masculinity, standing up to a guy and saying, hey, that's just not right what you just did, is a good thing, I think. And I think we have an opportunity, if not an obligation, to work together to get that message.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Patty Giggins, for doing all the work that she does at Peace Over Violence and bringing on amazing people like Rashad and Jeanette Robinson-Flint at Black Women for Wellness. And I mean, everyone. I mean, you get to work with two amazing women every day, and so I'm extremely jealous of the work that you all get to do because they're just models of our community.
Did you want to? Anybody else have anything to add? No. Okay, well, we're getting near the portion of the program where the audience will be able to ask questions. So if you have any questions swirling around your mind for the panel, please, is there going to be a microphone floating around?
I can walk around.
Okay, Amanda will have a microphone floating around. I do want to ask the panel one last question, and John, it may be a good one for you to start with, but because we have the Women's March, because there's these great mass mobilizations happening, I just want to hear from everybody. And Me Too has been highly visible. There's so many great visible social movements. How do you feel that has impacted the role, or feminism activism, or shaped or changed your feminist activism in the last couple of years, specifically under the Trump presidency? And I know for some of you, your feminism may have been around that same timeline, but as the audience is asking or preparing to ask questions, I'll just wrap it up with that.
So everyone always asks me how I got involved with the Women's March, like how I came to be a part of it. Amanda stole my microphone even though I gave it to her.
It's not stealing.
I know. We're a comedy routine. See us tonight, Sunday at 5 p.m. I got in the Women's March because I guess people had known who I was and the work that I had done, and I was so honored to be a part of that community because although my activism didn't start in November or kind of leading up to that, it's been a while, but that Women's March and the one this year was so crucial and important to me because I have 2 nieces and 2 nephews back home in Wisconsin that, and my niece is so freaking smart. She literally asked my sister, what happened to the nice lady on television? I liked her. Right? And I'm a horrible uncle. I'm forgetting how old. She's 8. She's 8. Oh. Anywho, she's 8. But that's where the change starts. And so I wanted her to watch television that day, and I wanted her to see mass mobilizations of women across the world taking power back from this oppressive regime that was both there before. Don't get me started. It was there before, and it's going to be there after. But I wanted her and my nephews to, when they watch television, these media sources, for them to be able to see that they can be whatever they want to be. I don't want them to have to ask to have to be that. I want them just to know it. And that's what the Women's March and those types of mass mobilizations meant to me, and that's why I got so involved.
Thank you.
In January 2017, it was right after the election, I got contacted by a Washington Post reporter who wanted to ask me whether or not men had a role at the Women's March. Should men go to the Women's March? And I was like, I gave a quote for it that is pretty innocuous, but like I gave her a long talking to. It was a female reporter, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about? Like, is this still a question? And it just, if you look back at the way the campaigns were reported on and how it's still being reported on, it's like, I'm so happy about the hashtag #MeToo movement, and I think it's brilliant, and I think men need to also get out of the way a little bit and know, like, this is a time now to support women and understand, like, I'm not going to go up against that. It is a long time coming. I'm happy that it seems like maybe people were motivated by her loss in a way they weren't maybe by her campaign. But regardless, It's a movement that I think is very exciting, and I'm happy to be a part of it in any way that is, that'll have me without sort of taking the limelight away. So get out of the way, boys. I don't know.
Well, and I'll say on that note, getting out of the way, but also recognizing the stories or ways that sexual violence has impacted your life. And I add that because a representative in Pennsylvania, who I was pleased to work with this month around the Bill Cosby trial, we delivered 90,000 petition signatures to the state of Pennsylvania to end the statute of limitations on rape and sexual assault in that state. And the champion of that legislation had actually been a male survivor of sexual violence. He was raped at the age of 13 by his priest, and had for 14 years while working in the legislature been trying to push legislation to end the reporting timeline that kept him legally silenced from his very strong case against this priest who abused him. And so the reason he was silenced and so easily swept under the rug is because of a failure of the women's movement, the women's movement against sexual violence, to bring him in as an ally, right? To see him and his pain as real and legitimize it 14 years ago. It shouldn't have taken the Me Too hashtag for us to march into that state with 90,000 petition signatures and stand next to somebody who had experienced sexual violence in the way and degree he did. And still, we have this great convergence happening, right? Where we have a very strong leader who has a very specific way his issue happened to him, and it may not be the way all women have experienced sexual violence, and still it's persisted on. So I'll just say with that, in my experience, having this male leader testify and bring the strength to what has traditionally been seen as a women's issue was something that I couldn't even imagine the power of. Thank you, Nadia. So that I will turn it
Can I give a real quick quote?
Please.
This is just like, I love this quote, and it speaks exactly to that, okay? It wasn't only wickedness and scheming that made people unhappy. It was confusion and misunderstanding. Above all, it was the failure to grasp the simple truth that other people are as real as you. That is Ian McEwen from Atonement, and I think that informs a lot of my work post-election in trying to bridge these gaps of understanding. We just have to understand that everyone here, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, we're all people, we're all experiencing the same thing, and if we can just recognize that and view it more holistically, I think it solves a lot of the problem.
Yes, thank you. All right, we'll kick it over to the audience. People with hands up.
Okay. Hi, great seeing you. I'm Sandra Morales. I'm from Mexico City. I flew out just to be in this conversation with you guys. I love it when men get as involved and as passionate as we all are about feminism. And I'd love to go back home with ideas on how to empower men and how to have them support the feminist movement that we are all talking and excited about.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm going to say you should read Rashad's article because it was insane. But any other advice? Insanely good. Any other advice from the crowd?
Okay. So again, I think we have to figure out a way to make this movement mean something to men, because for the longest time, and even still now, the feminist movement, women's liberation movements, they've always just been seen as a woman's issue. And we're not understanding that these things affect men as well. And one way that I get in is, I kind of use a Trojan horse method of getting into the conversation, where I'm talking about something that they can relate to and they can understand, and then I start to dive into like the deeper stuff. So it's like I'll ask them, what does it look like when you're afraid for your mother to like walk home from work? And because I'm doing a lot of education with boys from gang-infested neighborhoods and neighborhoods that are filled with crime or discrepancy. So it's like that's the questions I'm asking, so I can make it relate to them. Their mothers have to come home on the bus. They have to walk home through neighborhoods. And so I'm asking them, how does it feel worrying about your mother? And why do you worry about it? Because I know she might get hurt. Well, who's going to be doing the hurting? Who's going to be hurting her? Well, some dude. Okay, well, then we understand that statistically men are the ones that are going to be the perpetrators. So it's like, okay, if you can already see that it's going to be men that is going to be the ones hurting your mom, wouldn't you want to try to do something to change that? you know, talking to your friends or something to where there's not more men in the future. You know, even guys who have daughters or have sisters or have nieces or have cousins or aunts or whatever, you know, I get in at that familial level so where it can hit them, to where they can understand that because 1 in 3 women have been abused or assaulted at some point in their life, and the number is probably much higher, that, you know, it's gonna probably hit home with some woman that they know. And then once they can understand that, then I'm like, okay, now there are other women out in the world that you may not know, but they still deserve the same respect your mom does, right? They still deserve the same safety that your niece does, right? Or they shouldn't have to worry about these things. And so if you can make it mean something to them to where they can say, oh, you know what, like, damn, you do have a point at that, then you can start to open up the conversation. But you have to build that rapport. You have to have the cultural competency to understand the demographic that you're dealing with, or the trauma, the level of trauma in men that you're dealing with, and then try to get in it through that. And there might be some times where men might be hesitant or give pushback towards women because they're still not there yet at that level. So then that's why we need more men to be able to go into those spaces and talk to them. The same way with racism, you know, you need white people to talk to other white people, because black people have, and Latino people and other people of color have been talking about these issues, you know, for the longest, and we haven't gotten to the place we want to be in. And it's the same with gender. You know, women have been doing this work. If it could have been stopped by women doing this work, it would have been stopped. So we need men to be able to talk to other men and find a way to get in and make these issues mean something to us.
Thank you. So another question? Great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Janae Oliver, and as you might guess, Oliver Richardson is my nephew. We're very proud of you. It takes a lot of courage to kind of be in this space. As you can tell, his first name is our last name, so we kind of think we can set him up for this. And I just wanted to mention that what Oliver didn't share is that his mother is a celebrity hairstylist, and she's sitting here. And so I mentioned that because it's very significant that he was raised around a lot of women, very strong women, and he was, you know, constantly in the hair salon, engaging with her clients and really kind of having these strong relationships with women. And so I just wanted him to maybe talk about how that might have influenced him growing up and just kind of being encircled in that kind of support system.
Thank you. That's a great question.
Well then, it has definitely opened my mind a lot. Growing up, being around wonderful women, and it's opened my mind a lot because knowing how my mom has raised me and how I was raised by the women that are in the salon, as everyone says, it takes a village.
Also Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so being around all those women, you know, and I see the things that women go through, it's like I need other men to know, like, what you guys are doing is just like not okay. Like, we all need to at some point sit down and have a conversation about this, because one day it's gonna go overboard and it's gonna get worse. You know, at the end of the day, we need to stop men from doing what they're doing now, because later on, something else crazy is gonna happen. But it's just influenced me because I see how hard my mom works, and I see how hard everybody in the salon works, you know, just to do what they're doing on a daily basis. And I see what women go through, and I know that it's hard to be in those shoes. So that's why.
Thank you. Other questions from the crowd?
Hi, my name is Crystal Keshwars. I am the Vice President of Afghans in North America and the President of Afghan Women in the Diaspora. My question is specifically to Alex, because I feel as though perhaps you could relate.
What was that?
I said my question is specifically to you because I feel as though perhaps you could relate to the community. We have a situation where an Afghan celebrity has been accused of rape, and the woman who is accusing him is also a celebrity. And this is representative of many of our struggles because in our culture, there is this dichotomy, this virgin whore dichotomy of women who deserve to be defended and women who don't. And what this celebrity, this female celebrity represents is women who work, women who are in the public eye, women who are professionals, and women who dare to raise their voice. And we have a situation where the men in the community refuse to rally around this woman because she is, quote unquote, supposedly that type of woman. How do we challenge this virgin whore dichotomy within our cultures so that we can reach men? Because when we tell them, what about your mother and sister? They say they would never do such a thing, right? So then how do we challenge them, and how do we make them realize that when they play this person's music or ascribe to their art and laugh while doing so, that it is truly damaging for not just the women that they don't want to defend, but for their mothers, for their sisters, and for their daughters?
Great question, thank you.
I think a part of this problem is that we have to stop relating to women as merely the role that they are in relationship to us. That's endemically misogynistic. It's like, it's not just like, you're my mom and therefore I'm going to defend you just because you're my mom. It's women are human beings. It's a form of, it's about reframing the conversation about how we relate to one another. When I said earlier, human rights are women's rights or women's rights are human rights, it's because it's all the same, And I don't know what it's going to take to get there. I really don't, especially within the context of cultural attitudes towards women. They're maybe different there, obviously, than here. But we just saw this similar situation with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They were so quick to defend Sarah Huckabee Sanders because maybe she didn't look like Britney Spears or something. But she didn't actually get insulted for her looks. There wasn't a single insult about her looks in that joke. It was actually, there were insults about so-and-so's neck being like, I don't know, about males who were in positions of power that were about their looks. But they didn't care, nobody was quick to jump to them, to defend them. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is a liar, she's a woman, she's a liar. It has nothing to do with one. One has nothing to do with the other. I think it's about reframing the conversation, reframing the way we relate to each other. But, yeah.
And to follow up on what he was saying, oftentimes I feel like men are really, they are afraid to come to defense of saying, well, no, that wasn't a sexist comment. Like, I mean, the woke men maybe I jumped out there and said, oh, first of all, do you know what the joke actually was about? But, and understanding what really sexism is, right? And understanding the ways in which the right, these people now in power are trying to co-opt feminism in the way to say everything that you're saying against Kellyanne, Sarah, Melania, it's sexist. It's like, no, we're actually critiquing Melania's complicity, everyone's complicity in regards to the lying and the slander and the abuse and, the cover-ups that are going on. And we can't be afraid to really question, no matter who you are, that type of narrative that's going around, because when the right is allowed to take feminism from us and use it for their own derogatory wills, that's when we start looking as a country where we're starting to get so divided that we're taking, the right is now using a tool that, they used to, they still demonize, but, you had Phyllis Schlafly out there, the ERA was going around saying the worst things about feminism, and now she's not alive right now, but if she were, I won't say what I really was going to say, but if she was alive right now, would she be using feminism as a defense mechanism for, Sarah or any of these other people, right? Now, there is a line, don't make fun of Melania's looks. I know people post all that stuff. It's horrible. You need to call out your friends. When someone's posting, I've seen them all the time, a photo of Sarah's face or whoever, that's wrong, that's not okay, and it doesn't matter who it is, you should call it out and say it to the people, because if you don't call out, even when your friends or your communities are saying sexist things, then we don't get anywhere.
I want to just tag on that real quickly. And this includes on the liberal side, right? So if if someone is to call Kellyanne Conway a bitch, I'm the first person to be like, no. We have message boards for Bros for Hillary / Bros for America, and we have a lot of people who post comments, and they will sometimes say things like, oh, yes, Kellyanne, I hate her, she's a bitch. I go, you cannot honestly be in a group that supports women in positions of power where we defend against the misogyny and are self-righteous about defending against people and the way they treated Hillary Clinton because she was a woman, or any woman in power because of the fact that she's a woman, and then go around and call Kellyanne Conway a bitch. It's just like, you can disagree with her, she's a liar too, she's complicit too, she's terrible, but you can't stoop to that same level. That is when it is, you're contributing to the problem, no matter what your intention might be, even if you're positively sort of intended.
Thank you. And we are unfortunately out of time. I want to, before we close, I want to just say this statement, which is, you left a perfect place for me. We, feminists, cannot simply fight for more women's representation. We must actively facilitate and highlight women's own analysis and experiences of capitalism and oppression, especially women of color. That is the responsibility of feminists. Though patriarchy affects women much more severely, it distorts the humanity of all genders and reduces our ability to be in kinship with one another. Smashing patriarchy is not just a collective responsibility, it is ultimately about personal and interpersonal growth and collective liberation, and I want to thank our incredible panelists for modeling what this looks like every single day, and the work you do and the lives you live, and thanks for being on the panel.